John, last week you and I talked about Senator Susan Collins in Maine. Democrats were eyeing her seat as a particularly vulnerable one, but Collins ended up defeating Sarah Gideon to win re-election despite those polling projections. What happened there?
Tonight, Americans from 14 different states will cast their vote in the largest primary on the road to the nomination. With over 40% of the country voting tonight, there are more than 1,300 delegate votes up for grabs.
Access to public transportation is another issue Janie holds close, as she herself said she doesn't own a car. She advocates for a more transparent MBTA and easier and better access to transportation for workers, including free bus services for certain routes.
The Democrat Cal Cunningham conceded the North Carolina Senate race to Thom Tillis, making the two runoff races in Georgia all that more important. How should the two different parties approach that January 5th election?
Having served on Boston City Council since 2016, Campbell's mayoral campaign prioritizes equal access to opportunity and promises to create a more connected Boston through a number of measures, including, quote, requiring racial equity and anti-racism training for Boston's entire city government and demilitarizing Boston's police.
Sanders has won his home state of Vermont, and we're here in Burlington at his campaign rally. I'm Alex Ross for BUTV 10.
It's surprising that Georgia's a battleground state. It's also surprising that we have Texas as a battleground state. Texas has not gone blue since Jimmy Carter. What do we think? Is Texas going to follow Georgia's pattern? Does it depend on some of those bigger cities? What are we looking at here?
Many of us, myself included, were binge-watching shows now more than ever. What's it been like to see a surge of people re-watching your life's work in film and TV?
I want to start off with an area we know you're passionate about, because in addition to your role as President pro tempore, you're also the chair of the Environment, Resiliency, and Parks Committee, and you've led the way on a number of environmental initiatives. Protecting the environment is at the core of many of these candidates' platforms. So I'm wondering, what do you hope the next mayor achieves in terms of saving the planet from a local level?
Well, it's a great question.
As you just mentioned, those bigger tech companies, those bigger social media platforms like Twitter, like Facebook, are a little slow on the uptake. How can the general public make sure the information they're receiving on those social media platforms about the election is accurate and reliable?
Now, if we dive in just a little deeper, you share ties to places like Roslindale and Roxbury with some of our candidates, Michelle Wu and Kim Janey specifically. What do you think are the most pressing issues in those areas that you'd like to see the next mayor address?
Now, as you mentioned with Donald Trump's alternate reality, here he is as the president. He's yet to concede the election, and he's still making baseless claims about voter fraud. What kind of position is this putting other members of the Republican Party in?
It's putting them in a ridiculous position.
We've talked a lot already about how closely you've worked with several of these candidates. They're your colleagues. I have to ask you, who are you endorsing for mayor?
So I haven't endorsed yet.
I heard you say you just recently stepped onto a set. Can you tell us what it was?
The Trump campaign has launched a multi-front offensive, or maybe I should call it a defensive, in the courts with all of their lawsuits. What's the strategy here? What's the best case scenario for the campaign or the administration?
A lot of it is just kabuki.
You won several awards for your graduate thesis, which modeled state-run paid family leave for Massachusetts. Paid family leave is a hot-button issue right now. Is there anything the next mayor can do to make progress in that arena?
Well, that's a good one. The city under Marty Walsh, two things happened in the city.
Hey, John, like I said, we're glad to have you here with us on election night. It might feel like it's getting late, but it is still relatively early in this race. There's a lot we don't know. But then again, we did just find out that Arizona looks like it's going to swing for Biden. What does this spell? Is this trouble for Trump? Is this spelling trouble for his campaign?
This year's mayoral election is also the first local race where Boston residents are allowed to vote by mail. This change, of course, brought on by COVID-19. Previously, residents were expected to cast their ballot in person at the polls, barring any special circumstance. The 2020 presidential election marked a change in Massachusetts vote-by-mail restrictions as part of the effort to decrease transmission of COVID-19 at the polls. According to the Boston Herald, a total of 38% of Boston voters cast their ballots through the mail last year. Chloe?
Johnson & Johnson announced this morning that it's seeking emergency use authorization from the Food and Drug Administration for its COVID-19 booster shot. According to NBC News, the shot would be for people ages 18 years and older, and more than 15 million Americans have received the single-dose J&J vaccine, per data from the CDC. Scientists remain divided over the need for boosters, though the Biden administration is pushing for the extra dose to protect against the highly transmissible variants. J&J said last month that the booster shot, given 2 months after the first dose, increased the vaccine's effectiveness from 70 to 94%.
Chloe, we just heard Will say we might be able to expect more concrete numbers tonight as we approach 8:30. We might wait until tomorrow morning. Either way, big news coming out of Boston tonight.